realize
wander in. Just hold on a second, though, because my wife texted me, and I feel like I better answer this one. Sorry about this. That's right. I know where my bread is buttered, so I better answer my wife's text.
back to the watch.
There we go. Now I can focus on the other queen bees. Okay. Now, after all that biology talk that many of you said, through which many of you said, I'm going to kind of package it all together into an overview of beekeeping. Now, if you have visited any beekeeping booth or table or gone to any beekeeping website, there's lots of books on beekeeping, there's lots of websites on beekeeping. You know, there are books this thick on beekeeping. I say all that to say that you probably fully appreciate the next hour and 14 minutes, hour and 11 minutes, that there's no way on the planet I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about keeping bees. So what this is it is a very general overview of getting started in it and what the typical management year looks like for the beekeeper. Okay? So I call it to be or not to be, but I'm assuming since you're all here in a bee meeting, you're electing to be, right? You're electing to keep bees, okay? So let's start with that preconception in mind. Now, I think, all right, sorry, I got another text from my wife. It's okay, I don't have to respond to that. So, I think that a lot of people wonder why in the world they would need to sit through a talk like what I just gave earlier before the break. Why do we need to know about bees? Most people come right out the gate swinging for the fences, right? They want to go straight into beekeeping. But I'm convinced the best beekeepers know as much as possible about the organism with which they're working. Because this is what I tell people. In essence, successful beekeepers must understand bees, must understand what you want to achieve as a beekeeper, and then you work to synchronize 1 and 2. You know what bees want to do, you know what you want to do, and you manage them in a way that those two objectives are synchronized. Does that make sense? So I just spent about an hour and 15 minutes giving an overview of point 1. That's what bees want to do. That's who they are, that's what they want to do. Now I'm going to give about the same amount of time dedicated to helping you understand what the options are and how the typical year in a beekeeper's life, how it looks. So let's talk about that. Now, I once heard, and there's no way on the planet to vet this appropriately, but I once heard, I'm not sure I believe it, still it's been one of those things that's been told, that honeybees are the second most written about thing on the planet. Second only to religion. I doubt that that's true, but what it illustrates is that there are books galore, there are newspapers for bees, there are magazines for bees, there are websites for bees and blogs for bees, and just on and on and on. There is a wealth of information out there about bees, and given that most of you have been keeping bees less than 5 years, and some of you don't even have bees yet, I'm going to spend the first few slides about telling you how to find information. I think that's crucial, because here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you an overview of what's about to happen. My family and I are going on sabbatical in a week and 2 days. I'm going to be in Germany for 6 months. This is the last thing I'm doing for the University of Florida before I go. So literally when I put the microphone down at lunch, March 8th is the next time I'll pick up a microphone and be able to answer questions and emails and phone calls easily. I won't say I won't be able to do it, I'll just say easily. you are going to be overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming your way, just like you probably were maybe in the first hour. That's fine, that's just the way it works. So you're going to say, we're going to find more information. I couldn't remember what he said about blank, or about this, or about that. The key about it is, though, is that there's beekeeping stuff everywhere. Literally, you are like 2 minutes down the road from one of the largest equipment suppliers in the world. Tate Danton Sons is the biggest beekeeping equipment supplier in the country, and their southeastern branch office is a mile and a half down the road on the right, towards High Springs. I mean, you are close to a lot of resources, but you have to know they're there in order to be able to access them. So, what do I always tell people? You need to start buying beginner beekeeping books. So some of the typical beginner books are like First Lessons in Beekeepers, these things like here. Probably, you know, most of these books here are just books full of information. You know, put together by chapter. Chapter 1, information on this. Chapter 2, information on this. This book, Honeybees and Beekeeping, actually walks you linearly through a year in keeping colonies. So it's kind of more oriented from, you know, it does give you on the front end a little bit of information, but it talks to you about, you know, what you should be doing as the year progresses. That's why they call it Honeybees and Beekeeping. You can't see the subtitle here, but it says A Year in the Life of the Apiary. So I kind of consider these reference books, I kind of consider this a beekeeping manual. So this was actually written by my colleague up at the University of Georgia, kind of the Georgia Jam. So he does what I do here, he does it up in Georgia. Okay, so he wrote this book, so it's kind of got Southeast in mind. I did my undergraduate at the University of Georgia, worked in Dr. Delaplane's lab. This is Dr. Delaplane's book. For those of you who are writing it down in order to get the book title, and the author's name, his last name is Delaplane, D-E-L-A-P-L-A-N-E, Delaplane. So I did my undergraduate at the University of Georgia, worked in his lab. My wife actually did her PhD with him. And that's her right there. I know you can't tell, and I promise I'm not getting any proceeds from this book. I'm not steering you this book for any reason except that it really does kind of walk you through a year of keeping bees. You should own every beekeeping book on the planet. This will probably be one of those that you use kind of a lot. With that said, there are 2 books that are considered the Beekeeper Bibles, ABC and XYZ of Bee Culture, and The Hive and the Honeybee. These are 2 massive reference guides. Both of these books are currently being rewritten. I wish I could tell you they were going to be out tomorrow, or 6 months from tomorrow, or 10 years from tomorrow. I just don't know. I'm actually a co-author on one of the chapters of this book, and I wrote that chapter 8 years ago. So I have no idea when it's coming out. So I used to tell people, don't buy it, there's one coming out. Don't worry, buy it. When the new ones come out, get them too. All right? There also happen to be 2 national journals associated with beekeeping. One of those is Bee Culture, and one of those is the American Bee Journal. So these you can get monthly subscriptions to. It comes in the mail, into your mailbox. And these 2 journals keep you up to date with kind of the latest information related to keeping bees. So I happen to be a columnist for American Bee Journal. So I have a monthly column in there about how to keep bees. Again, I'm not necessarily pushing you to that. I'm just telling you that's what I do. I have colleagues who are columnists in both of these journals. And in essence, the same person who publishes this book and this journal is the same individual, and this book and this journal are published by the same individual. So Bee Culture and ABC and XYZ of Bee Culture are all AI Root, and the Hive and the Honeybee and the American Bee Journal are all Tate Danton Sons. Right? I also strongly recommend that you join a beekeepers club. Like bees, beekeepers are remarkably well organized and are socially oriented. You all came to a bee club's group meeting today, right? There are local clubs, I'm told in Florida, there's somewhere around 40 something now. There are state clubs, like in our case, the Florida State Beekeepers Association. There are regional clubs within the United States, like the Eastern Apiculture Society and the Western Apiculture Society and the Heartland Apiculture Society. And there are national clubs, the American Beekeeping Federation and the American Honey Producers Association. At many states and many national levels, there are often 2 or more clubs because usually people can't get along. So usually when people can't get along, they'll, anybody from Indiana? I speak in Indiana a lot. There's an Indiana State Beekeepers Association and an Indiana Beekeepers Association. And I speak at one, and the next year I get invited to the other, and I go, I just spoke there last year. And they're like, no, that is not us. You did not speak to us. That's the other club. So regardless, my point is whether you're blue state or red state, conservative or Democrat, there's a beekeeping club for you. Right? We're all people, the last I checked. So I wanted to tell you, Alachua County Beekeepers Club, there's the Gainesville Area Bee Club, there's, I think, one in Fort White, I think there's one in Lake City. I mean, they're just all around everywhere, like bees. Join one, join 6. It's good for you. There we go. Did I skip one? I'll never know. Okay, another thing that I recommend that you do is you look up resources. This is just to show you that there's newsletters and websites and master beekeeper programs and bee colleges, etc., all that you can use to advance. If you are getting into beekeeping brand new, there is zero substitute for having a mentor. This is super important to hear. Mentors are people too, and people make mistakes. So I recommend you have 7 mentors so that you'll get a well-rounded view of how things are done. Where I am from, there was one beekeeper in the area. He taught me everything he knew. I learned a lot, but I learned a lot of misinformation. So in beekeeping, there are facts, like the biology talk I gave you, and opinion, like this talk I'm giving you. It's okay to try lots of different things, no matter how hard something's being drilled into you. Okay? So have more than one mentor. I'll give you an example of how mentors can lead you astray, or be your best friend. My mentor got me into beekeeping. I got into beekeeping when I was 12. He passed away when I was 13. He left me all his equipment and all of his bees, and I was by myself in the middle of Georgia with no one else to talk to. So I learned a lot about bees the hard way. But one thing I do remember this guy taught me that was a little bit wrong, maybe not wrong, but just not cool. He told me, y'all remember seeing that picture of the swarm hanging on the fence? He said, now Jamie, swarms are bad. And if they come out of your colony, you got to get them back into your colony. He said, but if they're way up there in the tree, you can't reach up there and get them. But I want you to know something, Jamie. He says on a tree limb, the queen is always at the top center of the cluster. So if the cluster's here, the queen is always in the middle. So what you need to do, if your swarm is so far up that you can't get it, you need to go inside and get your shotgun. And you need to get your shotgun on full choke with a tight pattern. And you need to shoot that swarm right here, because you'll kill the queen, which will make the bees go back to the colony. So I'm from Georgia. I didn't know until I left Georgia that some people don't like owning guns. I own guns, I have guns, my granddaddy has guns. I grew up hunting, and I went to my granddad's house and I got his 12 gauge on my first swarm. And I said, well, I'm 12 years old. I said, my mentor told me to do this, so this is what I'm going to do. And I blasted that thing, and it regrouped. I said, what? And I blasted it again, and it regrouped. And I blasted it again, and it regrouped. And I blasted it again, it regrouped. And I said, you know what? A monkey would have learned faster than I did. I probably better stop shooting this thing. And I never shot another swarm. But that gives you an example of how you can get erroneous information. Fish. Get a lot of information from a lot of people, but have some go-to people that you can go to. Did you get it? Did you get that central message through my story? Don't shoot swarms. And swarms are not, I wasn't getting attacked, but I was just killing bees senselessly. It was stupid. That 13-year-old boy didn't know any better. Right? Anyway, have a mentor, apprentice with a beekeeper. I'll also tell you that places that sell beekeeping equipment, like Danette down the road, or Man Lake, or Brushy Mountain Bee Farm, or Rossman Apiaries, etc. All of these places are resources for you to ask questions. People, they all contain people who will answer your questions. So, kind of now that you know where to find information, it is important that you take the next step in your beekeeping endeavor and ask and answer this question of yourself. Ready? Why am I keeping bees? I can tell you the short answer to that question is actually easy. A couple months ago, maybe a few years ago, there was this military commercial on TV where this town is in complete duress and all the citizens are running out of the town across the desert, but the military is running into the town. Y'all know that commercial I'm talking about? That's supposed to pump you up and get you in the military. That is you. The rest of the world runs away from bees. But you put on your spacesuits and run straight into the storm. I want you to think about that. You gave up a Saturday morning. You might be here all day. Let's just say if you listen to me about to 12 o'clock, you'll have heard me for 3 hours. You gave up a Saturday morning to listen to me for 3 hours because of bees. Now that graduates you into the top 2% of crazy, right? Think about it. The rest of the world hates bees, they're scared of bees, they get stung, etc. Not you. There are only 2 people groups crazier than bee people. And that's horse people and bird people. If you happen to like birds and keep horses and are trying to get into beekeeping, you are officially insane. But the reason I'm telling you this is you've got to know why you're keeping bees. And you've got to remember that everybody else around you is going to think you're weird. But that's okay. You are. Okay? So why are you keeping bees? Do you want bees just because you want bees? Do you want bees because you want to make honey? Do you want bees because you want to pollinate your garden? Do you want bees because you want the other stuff, the wax or propolis that you can make candles and stuff with? Do you want bees because you like to be stung? Do you want bees because you want to make more bees and sell bees? All of the answers to all of those questions will dictate how you manage your bees. If you go into beekeeping without clear goals, you're going to have problems. Because all of management is built on the assumption that you know what you want to accomplish with your bees. And depending on which route you choose, it will dictate a lot of different management styles. Does that make sense? So I think that's what this says. Know who and why, where you're going to get your stuff, what you're going to use. But most importantly, what are your goals? And I'll tell you about that in a minute. I want to spend something just here for a second. Whether, beekeeping's full of decisions. Who's going to be your equipment provider? What kind of colonies you're going to use? Where you're going to put your bees, etc. I will tell you the answers to many of these questions are, it really doesn't matter. It's up to you. I'm going to give you an example. If you go, well, a lot of people who talk about putting their colonies together, etc., will say, don't use queen excluders. Use queen excluders. Use 8-frame equipment. Use 10-frame equipment. Use double deeps. Use only mediums. And I will tell you, it doesn't matter, and I don't care what you use. Bees are going to do what they're going to do, no matter what kind of box you put them in. If 8 frames are your thing, use 8 frames. If you like excluders, use them. If you don't, I don't care. The bees don't care. There's a lot of misconception built into why we choose the pieces of equipment, but I will tell you truth number one, our bees are extremely forgiving. You really can go out there and experiment and find what works for you and do it. Make sense? I think that's fair because a lot of beginner beekeepers are shackled into these things that they're told they have to do. And I will submit to you, the biology of bees is fact. The keeping of bees is an art. And you can do whatever you want to in your own art. Does that make sense? Is that somewhat liberating? So this is not a talk on whether or not to use excluders or not excluders. This is simply a talk on do your thing. Here's how it works. Alright, so what are you going to do? Are you going to keep bees because you want to harvest their vomit? Right? Their pre-vomit? Are you going to keep bees because you want to pollinate crops because you have a garden in your backyard? Or do you want to make more bees? The answer to those questions dictates a lot of things. And I'm going to give you some examples as we move on. Honey production. There are some areas on this planet that you cannot produce honey. When I lived in Georgia and I put my bees out at my grandfather's dairy farm, I thought, wow, beekeeping's easy. I put my bees out and I get honey. This is the best deal ever. And I used to laugh when beekeepers say, I did everything right. I couldn't get honey. I'm like, man, you're just a moron. And then I moved to High Springs. High Springs, it's kind of scary. Within a 3-mile radius of my house, there's nothing but pine trees and oak trees. And when's the last time you bought oak honey? Location is everything if you want to make honey. Where I live, I can't make honey. Now we'll talk a little bit about this as we go through. I'm not saying all of High Springs, but where I live in High Springs, I can't make honey. If I were a honey producer, my management style had better change. Location, location, location. This is your goal if you're a honey producer, right? You see that beekeeper right there? Those are actual colonies that he's having to prop up with poles because they're so full of honey. If you're a honey producer, you go where that guy's hanging out, right? Not where I'm hanging out. Location, location, location. What about pollination? Well, hives that are managed for pollination have different goals. They have to be strong, they have to have queens, they have to have lots of food, because I want to tell you a simple truth about pollination. Most of the crops to which our bees are taken to pollinate do not produce enough nectar for the bees to produce a named honey. Have you ever thought about that? Almost all the honey that we produce in Florida is from a wild bush. Tupelo, gallberry, palmetto, mangrove, Brazilian pepper. The only exception to that rule is citrus. Have you ever wondered why there's no real such thing as watermelon honey? Because the crops that our bees are used to pollinate usually don't produce enough nectar to give you a honey crop. So if you're using your bees to pollinate crops, watermelons, blueberries, cucumbers, squashes, cantaloupes, you're going to have to feed your bees. Different management style, right? So you're going to have to make sure they have lots of food and they have to have lots of brood. Why lots of brood? Because brood creates the demand for pollen. If you want your bees to be good pollinators of your garden, you've got to have queen-right colonies with lots of brood. You were going to ask a question? It's got to be loud because there's a lot behind you.
Are there any listings that geographically specify different areas of honey production?
Are there listings that show different areas of honey production anywhere? The state in Florida. The state is trying to put together one of those web pages that has GIS information on where all the gallberry and palmetto and stuff like that is found in the state. And it's at, I think it's at floridabeeprotection.org. If it's not at floridabeeprotection.org, Google Florida Bee Protection website. And then it'll get you there. And they've got they're trying to assemble a map that shows where all the hot spots are. In Florida, the one exception again to this rule is citrus, but bees are not taken to citrus to pollinate citrus. Citrus doesn't need honeybees. So bees are taken to citrus to produce honey. So I want you to remember that. Most of what we're going to get in our boxes that we want to put in jars has to come from nature, and pine trees and oak trees won't cut it. If you want to pollinate crops, you're going to be moving to places that bees don't get any honey. You're going to have to solve that problem for them. Two different management styles. We'll talk about it. So all of those mean location, location, location. Your good apiary site, you know, the books tell us should receive morning sun and afternoon shade. They should be close to water. That's important. There are no ponds, rivers, lakes, streams, mud puddles, anything close to my bees. But I got a horse person on one side and a horse person on the other side, so my bees go to their water. And so I need to do things to keep my bees out of their water. So you've got to think about that. They need to have a close source of water, or you need to provide it. Responsible beekeeping, right? So here's an example of bees being given sources of water they can drink. A good apiary site also shouldn't be too windy. You should keep the grass cut. In some places in Florida, like the road between Gainesville and Waldo, you better have a bear fence. You know that there are bears in Florida, right? A lot of our research apiaries around the Gainesville area get taken out because we didn't put up a bear fence. At High Springs, my bees have never been taken out. In the outskirts of Gainesville, my bees have been taken out. If you want to know if you've got bees in the area, bears in the area, get a beehive. In this area, you're going to be okay. East of us, especially that kind of Waldo area, you know, that kind of Austin Carey Memorial Forest area. South of Gainesville in the Citra area, we get Ocala National Forest, you're going to have bear problems. So keep that in mind. Sometimes it might be necessary to have a neighbor fence, right? What is that poem, What It Is That Doesn't Love a Fence, or something like that? Anyway, good fences make good neighbors. You shouldn't really be close to penned or tethered animals. That just means that you don't want your bees to be right on the other side of your neighbor's horses. You want to make sure that there's some distance between the two. You don't want to keep a junky apiary. Beekeeping can get junky fast, so you don't want stuff like that. And you want to have plenty of forage. Bees have to eat. They're going to either find it out there, or you're going to have to give it to them. And depending on where you are, you may have to give it to them. And I'm going to talk about that as I walk through my management steps here coming up. You also may want to make and sell bees. I'm going to do some simple math for you. The National Ag Statistics Service tells us that the average Florida honeybee colony produces 70 pounds per colony. Let's just say you get $5 a pound for that. Let's be nice and say $8 a pound. 8 times 70.
560.
Pardon? 560 is what we get. Okay? You can go into your full-size colonies and make splits. This is a split, a nuke. Nukes are sold by the frame. A 5-frame nuke is roughly about $150. From a single colony, you can make about 4 or 5 nukes a year. 10 if you're really good. Do the math. A well-maintained colony is going to give you more money in selling bees than it will in selling honey, especially if you live in areas where there are no honey plants. So some people simply make and sell bees. How many of you who want bees have a hard time finding them? The demand for bees is greater than ever. So a lot of people are getting into this. So what are you going to do? So with that background, knowing how to find resources and figuring out what you're trying to get out of your bees, this is kind of important. For many of you, bees are going to be a hobby, and hobbies are really good at losing money. Bees can pay for themselves. Golf can't, unless you're a pro. So my point is, if you're going to waste money on something, do it with bees because you're benefiting the environment. All right? All right. So with that kind of background, let me tell you what the typical beekeeping year, how the typical beekeeping year looks. You ready? It's a little bit technical, but I'm going to keep it as general as possible. So the things that you're going to have to be thinking about going into spring, and by spring I mean usually in this part of the world, March, April, and May. I know what the calendar says, but what I'm telling you what our climate says. Kind of March, April, and May. Going into March, coming out of winter, going into March, there are a couple of things that you've got to think about. Are my bees heavy enough to make it to the first major nectar flow? Otherwise, you might have to feed. Are they coming out of the winter with low diseases and pests? If I need to control swarming, do I want to make splits or am I using honey production? So let's just look at some of these paradigms. In early springs, colonies come out of their winter and their populations explode. There are 2 boxes of honey that I make every year living where I live. Wild cherry, those trees on the fence rows where the birds poop out the seeds and the trees grow. Wild cherry blooms in February. In February, I get a, sorry about using that word. I said poop though, that's the best I can do. All right, wild cherries my bees produce about a super of honey on wild cherries in February. Worst tasting honey ever. So basically I leave it on the bees, but once that stuff starts coming in, my bee populations explode. Like explode. By the time March is coming around, my bees want to swarm. They are ready to hit the trees, right? So they're going to grow. Incidentally, what plant in north central Florida starts to trigger the growth of a honeybee colony in winter? Red maple. Exactly. Red maple blooms December 23rd. That's the funny thing about beekeepers. If you've been around commercial beekeepers long enough, they know plus or minus 7 days of when their major honey plants bloom. So the commercial guys up here know plus or minus 7 days around December 23rd, their colonies are going to start to do this. Kind of at a growth like this. And when cherries bloom in February up here, their colonies are going to do this. And you're going to start having strong colonies that need some attention. right? You might have to control pests and diseases. You may have to feed them. May have to control swarming. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I want to point out that coming out of winter, why do bees store honey? You tell me, why do bees store honey? To eat? Well, why do they store honey? They could just eat it fresh. Why do they need to store it? They store honey to survive winter. That's important. The main nectar flow that lasts 6 weeks, now we live in Florida, things bloom here all the time, but just because it's on a stem and is open and looks pretty doesn't mean it makes honey. The most nectiferous time of year is late April to the first week of June. Outside of that, there is nothing major blooming. So bees store honey mainly during that time to survive the winter dearth. In our area, if there's lots of dearth, lots of low incoming nectar, bees can starve coming out of winter. If they don't have a lot of food stored for winter, they're coming out of winter hungry. So you may have to solve that by feeding them. It's real simple. You go up to the back of a colony. Here's my rule of thumb. You go to the back of a colony. They have these handholds, right? These little handles. You grab the one in the bottom from behind, and you simply try to curl it with one hand. If you struggle to rock it up, they have enough food. If you're doing it like this, you better get some food on them because they are going to starve to death. There are lots of ways to feed bees. There are lots of things to feed bees. The most common way to feed bees to get them the honey equivalent is just to feed them sugar syrup. Sugar and water mixed together. Put in a jar or in some type of feeder. What type of feeder is there? If you can envision a way to get sugar syrup to bees, there's a feeder to do it. And guess what? I am not going to tell you which one to use because guess what? It doesn't matter. Use the one you like, I don't care. But there's lots of ways to get sugar water to bees. The common way commercial guys do it is they'll do it in these jars that have holes poked in the lid. And when you turn the jar upside down, the vacuum keeps the stuff from drip, 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 dripping. And the bees go to the bottom and just lick off the sugar water from those holes. They then take that sugar water and convert it to a honey-like substance. That is their fuel. You can put the jar here, you can put the jar here. They make feeders that go physically into the colony that you fill up. They make feeders that go into an empty box at the top, and you can fill these feeders with sugar water. I don't care how you get the sugar water to the bees. They'll just need food if they are light. Okay? So feeding bees. Remember, bees really need two kinds of things. They need honey as their fuel, but they also need pollen as their food. They need pollen to produce more bees. I cannot say it again. For the newcomers, bees don't love plants. They're not doing plants a favor on purpose. They are going to plants to take from them that pollen and eat that pollen to make new bees. And in the process, of course, we get fruits, vegetables, nuts, berries. They estimate that as much as 1/3 of the world's food production comes from that process. All right? So bees collect pollen. Those are all pollen balls that were once on the hind leg of a bee. All of those different colors represent pollen from different flowers the bees in that colony visited. And I've seen pollen be white, and I've seen it be purple, and I've seen it be everything in between. What's interesting, though, is bees don't actually eat pollen. They eat bee bread. They mix the pollen with nectar. They pack it into their comb, and they mix it with some enzymes and some yeasts. And those yeasts ferment it. It's lactic acid fermentation, and it essentially turns that pollen into an edible bread for them. We call that bee bread, because we're not very creative with our terminology. All right? So that's bee bread when it's stored in the comb, and just pollen when it's coming in from the outside. But there are times of the year when there's not enough pollen coming in. In the ideal place, bees would have nectar and pollen available forever. In my backyard, that doesn't exist. So you can always tell how bad things are based on how many bees are visiting grass. I've got Bahia grass in my yard. It's the one that makes the tall stem with the fork at the top, with a little black powder. kind of things. If bees are visiting Bahia, there is nothing else available for it. Because all pollens have different nutrition associated with them. Some pollens are better than others. Bees don't forage for pine pollen. I feel like I'm going to chase a rabbit here, but I just want to tell you something I find utterly amazing. There are different ways that plants achieve pollination. Some are wind pollinated, some are vector pollinated, which means it takes an organism to move that pollen around. Honeybees collect pollen from plants that need insects to collect pollen from them. So the plants invest in producing nutritious pollen and little of it, so that bees won't get everything that they need from one flower. Because if they get it from one flower, the flower is not adequately pollinated. So insect-pollinated plants produce just enough to get bees there, but not enough. So bees have to go from flower to flower to flower to flower to flower, which spreads the pollen around. Wind-pollinated plants have a completely different strategy. Animals aren't moving their pollen around, so they just vomit forth pollen into the environment and hope that their seed spreads out somewhere and touches what it needs to touch. And it's that pollen that douses your cars in the spring. So, generally speaking, wind-pollinated plants like pine trees and grasses and corn are terrible quality for bees. So if bees are visiting those things, there's nothing else out there. Make sense? You can learn to read what's going on and they'll tell you everything you need to know about your environment. So in the event that there's nothing else out there and they're not getting what they need and you have the goal of producing strong colonies, you may have to provide that pollen. I will tell you, in the history of me keeping bees, I have never fed pollen patties to my colonies. But if I had other goals with keeping my bees, I might realize that there's not enough of this, so I have to supplement it with this. And you say, that's wrong. We should let our bees feed on the natural stuff. Well, I get that argument, but you probably own dogs and go to the store to buy dog food. Right? So sometimes if bees aren't getting enough, you have to give them, and these days you can just about go to the feed store and buy bee food. It's increasingly coming. So they make bags of bee food where there's a bee running through the yard instead of a dog carrying a frisbee. It's getting a little bit close to home to kind of see this stuff happen, but it's happening. So where do you do these? Here's an example of someone feeding a pollen patty onto a colony to make up for that. See how happy she is doing it? She's just so excited about giving this pollen patty to these bees. Again, you would only do this if you need to do it. Let me give you an example of why you would do this. Let's say your goal is to produce bees to sell. When do people want to buy bees? Well, they want to buy bees before the major nectar flow, which means the demand for bees is greatest when it's hardest to produce them, because they're coming out of winter with very low quality food sources available. If you want to make bees and have them ready for sale to all the people who are out there who want to buy bees in March, you've got to grow the colonies at a time the colonies aren't otherwise growing well. So your strategy might be to feed them a sugar syrup and a pollen patty to get them artificially strong so you could split early so that you have bees to sell. You see the strategy there? You've got to know your goal, and that will dictate whether you do things like this or not. That's not my goal, so I don't ever feed pollen patties. In fact, where I live, not so far from here, there's two things. I told you about the cherry. The cherry feeds my bees. They store enough cherry honey to get to August. And in August and September, Spanish needle blooms. Farmers hate this stuff, but it is an amazing plant for bees. It's that thing that's tall stem, little white flowers you see on the side of the road, and once the flowers croak, it's got these little things, and if you walk by them, it'll stick to you. That stuff's amazing food for honeybees. And they'll produce one super of green honey this time of year that they can use to live through winter. So I happen to like Spanish needle a lot, but it tastes terrible. So I get 2 supers of honey, one on cherry, one on Spanish needle, and that's enough to get my bees to the next honey flow. So I don't ever have to feed. But if I wanted to grow my colonies and split colonies and sell bees, I'd have to feed. You see kind of how strategy comes into play based on bee biology and what's available in the environment, etc. You also have to control diseases and pests. Don't worry about this. This is just an overview of bees and beekeeping. But if you keep bees any length of time, you're going to realize that lots of things make bees sick. Bees are alive. and things that are alive have things that go after them. Bees get viruses, bacterial diseases, fungal diseases. They get mites. The #1 killer of honeybees on the planet is that thing right there, the varroa mite. And given that I'm the speaker, you have to do exactly what I'm about to tell you, because I can't advance without you doing it. I need everybody to do this. Did you do this? Anyway, go back to doing this. I just want to see if you do it. I do that. If you were a honeybee, that would be the size of a varroa mite on you. Varroa mites are really small to the naked eye, but compared to their host, they are one of the largest parasites known on the planet. It would literally be like you carrying a volleyball-sized tick stuck to your body. So varroa mites aren't such a big problem in spring, but it's a good time to begin monitoring for them, because if you have sick colonies, you're not going to have productive colonies. And if your goal is to produce honey, you've got to have healthy colonies. So learning how to manage these things is important. And early spring is a good time to do that before the major nectar flow starts. You want to stop this. If you were here in my previous lecture, when that happens, you lost. If honey production is your thing and you're just planting wild bee colonies, you're losing. I traveled all around the world, and I was in Haiti years ago, and there were 50 colonies. I mean, Haiti's in the tropics. There are blooming plants everywhere. There are 50 colonies in this apiary. I said, man, nice apiary. How much do you produce? He said 50 pounds. I said, wow, 50 pounds per colony in a tropical environment is pretty good. He's like, no, not 50 pounds per colony. 50 pounds among all these colonies. And I said, what? He said, yeah. And so I tried to figure out why his colonies only produce a pound of edible honey per colony. And we went through a lot of things, and it turns out it was because he didn't control swarming. Listen, I get the mindset, but he believed that swarms were a gift from God. So he wanted his colonies to do as much of them as they could. And then he scratched his head later to wonder why he was not making honey. If you want to make honey, you want to control that. If you want to make and sell splits, you just lost $150. That could have been the split you put in a box and sold to the next sucker. Joke. Good. You get my drift? Knowing what you want to accomplish will shape what you do. You can't let this happen. So there are a few ways to control swarming. Again, this is a general overview, so I'm not going to bog down in any details. There's plenty of information online. Requeening colonies once a year, adding extra space so that the colonies won't get congested. Making sure that the weak colonies are boosted with populations from the strong ones so that the population in the strong one will be lessened. Right? We call that equalizing colonies, making sure that all the bees in the yard have the same strength. Going in once a week during swarm season and removing queen cells. This is what I happen to do. I happen to go in once a week from late March through May and pluck queen cells. And I don't control swarming to make honey. I control swarming to keep my bees from going into my neighbor's yards. Or at least I try to. So what does that look like? That means you go into your colonies once a week during swarm season and just simply pluck out the queen cells that are being developed. And then I'll show them there. Another thing that you can do, if you remember, it's the old queen who swarms. To swarm, she has to fly. To fly, she needs her wings. So some people will go and clip the tip of one of the queen's wings off so that she's just fine functionally, but so that she cannot swarm. I mean, it sounds harsh, but people do it to chickens all the time to keep chickens from flying. Right? So it's kind of the same premise. Bees have 4 wings, 2 on both sides of the body. One's big, one's small. Essentially, you cut the big one in half. She doesn't feel it, doesn't affect anything, she just can't fly. And all of these things collectively lessens the colony's likelihood of swarming. But sometimes you still lose, because swarming is reproduction, and reproduction is hard to stop. Life always succeeds. Isn't that what the dude on Jurassic Park says?
Right. Back to the queen cells. What if you pluck the queen cells out? They swarm anyway, and that hive's left open.
The question is what if you pluck the queen cells out and the hive still swarms? Well, you're going to have remembered the point that I haven't taught you yet, so I'm going to teach you here. Here's the most important thing about getting started in beekeeping. Never start with one colony. For all of you who've been working on your spouse saying, no, I really want to start with 2 or more, they're going, no, start off with 1, we'll see if you can do it. You can go home and tell him or her, Jamie gave me permission to start with not 2, but 3 colonies. And if you start with 3 colonies and your 1 swarms and you had cut out all the queen cells, you've got 2 colonies that have frames of eggs that you can give to that colony that they can use to make a queen. Never, I'm getting the mic close and emphasizing this, never start with 1 colony. 2 are essential, but it's mo better to have 3. Why is that the case? If you have 1, you will never know if it's doing okay or doing bad. I thought my first kid was a genius until I had another one. And I thought they were both okay until number 3 came around. And then I started losing faith, and my 4th one finally has it all together. Don't ever have just 1. It seems important. I have 4 kids, okay, 5 colonies. Don't ever have just 1 because you don't ever know if that one's normal or not. I don't like 2 because statistically 2 can be having problems at the same time and you'll not notice. If you have at least 3, the chances are 1 of them's doing okay, and if there's a problem in the 2, you got 1 to fix it with. Start with 3, you have my permission. Hey, I'm going out of the country, your spouse can't get mad at me. So, there you go. There was a long answer to your short question. Alrighty. Spring, early spring is a good time to make more colonies if you want to sell them. To be honest, if I wanted to get into the bee business where I live, this is what I would do. Knowing that I'm not going to make lots of honey and I don't have any crops to pollinate, this is what I do. The reason I don't do it is I don't want to compete with all the local beekeepers doing it. Kind of a conflict of interest. I'll let you make all the money and me just tell you how to do it. Okay? So this is a good time of year to just split colonies. What is a split? A split is simply a swarm that you don't have to climb 100 feet to a tree to get. A split is a controlled swarm. You are swarming that colony for it, and you're swarming it straight into your box. Does that make sense? That's why they're beautiful. And on top of that, not only did you not lose the bees, but you made $150 for doing it. How does that look? Don't worry about the text. Essentially, you can go into a full-size colony, take out 3 or 4 frames, put into a small box, add a new queen, booyah, $150. And a lot of beekeepers just simply feed their bees year-round, constantly creating splits and constantly selling to the people who want them. It's not there's a simple truth about bees. Bees make bees. If you have bees, you can easily get more because you can make more. So here's an example. Full-size colony. I was going into this colony and I was moving bees into this box. In this case, I actually put the queen and the bees in this box, and I bought a new queen and put in new frames in the parent colony. So my parent colony was requeened. My new colony, my nuke, is now sellable. Or grow it up and have a new colony. Right? This early spring is a good time of year in anticipation of the nectar flow. The reason for that is you're alleviating the swarming tendencies of the full-size colony. It thinks it's done it, and you're taking advantage of the coming nectar flow to feed this little baby beehive and grow it for you without you having to buy sugar water and put in there. That's why early spring is a good time to do this. In my opinion, I think queen management issues are the big issues that beginner beekeepers have. All beekeepers are going to get out there and get worried about diseases and pests, and I can't recognize this and I can't recognize that. But in my experience, it's bad queens. Poor queen management. Number 1, you can't find them. Number 2, you can't see eggs. Hey, you never have to find a queen ever if you learn how to see eggs. Because eggs tell you she was there. Right? Yep. Eggs take 3 days to hatch, so if you see eggs, there were queens there within at least the last 3 days. There are some other things. Swarming is a queen issue. You didn't control the new queens being produced or the old queen leaving. Dead queens or bad queens. This may be news, but you can have bad queens. beginner beekeepers tend to go into colonies and be so happy that there's a queen in there at all that they'll take what they can get, not knowing that sometimes you can have bad queens.
Oh, yeah.
A queen that's producing this much brood on a frame is producing a third of what she could be producing. When a colony has a third of the bees, you're producing a third of the income. Good queens make good colonies help you meet your goals. So typically queen management is an issue that a lot of new beekeepers face. So we're going to go past this. Is that kind of... Now, it's mid-spring. The major nectar flow is forthcoming. You've done your botanical homework. You know with certainty what's going to bloom and when it's going to bloom. But you say to yourself, oh my goodness, I live at 15223 Northwest State Road 45, High Springs, Florida, and I cannot stay here and produce honey. I'm going to have to move my bees to produce honey. You get it? That's what I'm saying. If I gave you my address, that's what I would say from where I live. I've got to move, which means I've got to move bees. So if I were into honey production, I'd be finding the best gallberry and palmetto stand between Lake City and the Okefenokee Swamp, and I would find a way to get my bees there on 441. Gallberry, palmetto galore, pine stands. Gallberry is the best honey you will produce in North Central Florida, period. The Panhandle, you can produce tupelo. Central Florida and South Florida, you can produce citrus. And those are the three major honeys that are good enough to put on a biscuit. A lot. So you may have to move your bees. I will confess to you, moving is the dumbest thing ever. How many of you like to move houses? Well, it's the same junk, moving bees. I mean, there are some easy ways to do it. You can go to Lowe's or Home Depot, you can buy these moving straps and strap them around the colonies, which is what I'm doing here. They make nets that you can put over the top. What I happen to do is I keep my old underwear, my old socks, and anytime I want to move bees, I strap the colony and I stuff my old underwear in the entrance. Keeps the bees inside, and then I'll throw that colony on the back of a truck and drive them somewhere and then put them where I want them to be. Obviously, the commercial guys do it a lot more economically. They keep bees on pallets. In this case, you see 4 colonies on a pallet. Here's the hive bottoms for those 4 colonies. Then they will forklift those pallets up and load them onto a truck to about 400 colonies on the back of the truck. And then they throw a net over the whole shebang and they drive them around the country. This is hard work. You do it at nighttime when all the bees are in the nest. Bees are attracted to lights at nighttime. So you do it with red lights because bees can't see the color red. They interpret it as black. So there's red lights everywhere. There's smokers everywhere. There's forklifts everywhere. There's noise. It's night. It's hot. It's sweaty. And bees don't fly at night. And you think that's good? No, that's not good. Because when bees don't fly, they crawl. And when they crawl, they find every opening that exists in your wardrobe. So moving bees at nighttime, you get stung in places you should not get stung. And it's all because bees found a way into your suit because it was nighttime. I don't like moving bees, but if I was serious about producing honey in this area, I would move my bees in mid-spring. You see how this pattern's going? You got to know your goals in order to know what to do. In mid-spring, you kind of continue doing that. Major nectar flows begin to increase. You get your weekly inspections to control swarms and disease and pest control, and you need to begin supering colonies. Remember, the boxes that we put on our hives are called supers. So supers are a noun and a verb in the bee world. You super with supers. So to super a colony means to add another box. You begin to super colonies in anticipation of the nectar flows. Your colonies begin to grow in mid-springs. There's a lot of beekeepers who say you need to put your empty supers on the top. A lot of beekeepers will say you need to take off all your full supers and put your empty super on the bottom and then put your full supers back on. The research has shown it doesn't matter where you put them, just put them on the hive. Okay? But regardless, you got to super them. They start growing, but the problem is you're smart. Inasmuch as you know when your flowers bloom, you know when your flowers stop. So you know, with that information then, you can start removing supers that aren't being used, so the bees will concentrate on finishing the ones that are still in the colony. For example, if this box, and this box are full, this box is half full, and this box is empty, and it is May the 25th, you take off this empty box so the bees focus their effort on finishing this one. It's simple things like that. And all that comes from knowing your blooms when they come in and when they go out, and learning to read the colonies. How do you know nectar's coming in? There's an easy way and a cool way. Which one do you want to hear first? The easy way. You take out the frame, you turn it on its side, and you lightly shake it. If nectar rains out of the combs, there's incoming nectar. Because once the bees start drying that off, the honey will not come out. So when it's raining out of the combs, there's fresh stuff coming in. The cool way is to catch bees coming in the front door and squeezing their abdomen a little and making them regurgitate what they just brought in from the field and seeing if they came in with nectar. If you're super duper cool, you can lick that right off of their tongue and know what they just visited to get that nectar. How many of you are super duper cool?
Yeah.
I didn't think so.
Yeah,
Some of you might step up to the mic someday. All right, so here's an example of removing supers in early summer. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, oh my gosh, there are 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. And Jamie just did only spring. It is 11:45. I have to be done at 12. How in the world is he going to finish the other 3 seasons? Well, I've told you about a lot of stuff that you simply continue. So now, rather than explaining it, I'll just tell you that you need to do it. Okay? Early summer, you're starting to take off your supers and harvest that honey. That's what you have been waiting for while the bees are bringing. Listen, this is the key. Bee management is about making colonies stronger than they ordinarily would be on their own. That causes them to store more honey than they ordinarily would store on their own. And you get to keep the extra. That's beekeeping. On their own, they'd split and save about 50 pounds. Keeping them from splitting, they might save 100 pounds. You get to keep the difference. That's beekeeping. Did you see it? It's just like that. So that's what's happening. Now I want you to think about this. In spring, with the volume of resources coming into that nest, that colony's population is doing that. Pretty much like what my household population has been doing over the past 5 years. The colony's population is doing that. But once the nectar flow begins to plummet, the bee populations start to go down. Naturally, there's fewer resources, less need for bees, etc. What doesn't go down are the disease and pest loads. While there's lots of resources coming in, bees are outpacing the diseases and pests. But once the resources slow down and the bee population declines, the number of varroa per bee increases. The bees are dying, the varroa are not. The number of viruses per bee increases. You get the drift? Bee populations are going down, pest populations are still going up, and what you tend to get is more problems per bee. So as a result, early summer is the beginning of the uh-oh time. And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse through October. So June to September are the key times to control the major pests and diseases for honeybees. And again, if you understand bee biology, you understand why that's the case. If you understand resources, you understand why that's the case. So that's why in June, early summer, you're beginning to think about those diseases and pests. You're thinking beetle populations are going to be getting higher, varroa populations are going to be getting higher. You might know that there's a dearth. Your colonies are coming out of a major nectar flow. They're stronger than they've been all year, and the tap just got cut off. You just took 100 pounds of their honey, left them with 20, and very quickly they can eat through that, and you can have a problem. You get it? So knowing those kinds of things help you appropriately anticipate the management decisions that you need to make. Diseases, food, summer and early fall are maximum stress times for colonies. So they're maximum attention time for beekeepers. So making sure they have water, making sure they have food so that they don't starve, etc. And this theme continues through midsummer. If you are lucky enough to live in a place that gives you a second major honey flow, then you get to start the process all over again. If you live in north central Florida, you're not lucky enough. South Florida, right now, Brazilian pepper is about to come in. So a lot of commercial beekeepers are taking their bees down to Brazilian pepper. They're going to make 2 or 3 supers of honey. Now, Brazilian pepper is not, we have 2 grades of honey, table grade and baker's grade. Table grade is the honey you're proud of in those jars on the table that you put on a biscuit. Baker's grade is that junk stuff that's just sweet enough to be called honey that Honey Nut Cheerios is going to put on their Honey Nut Cheerios. Baker's grade. Baker's grade is what's sold to the places for honey buns and Honey Nut Cheerios and that stuff. Table grade is what makes it to the jars on the stores. Make sense? So a lot of the late summer and fall honeys that might come in typically are Baker's grade. Good for bees, good for Honey Nut Cheerios, but not good for you. Brazilian pepper is one of those. So why do commercial beekeepers go? Because honey is still money, or it's food for bees. If you're super duper lucky, you live in a place that produces an edible summer honey, like North Georgia, where the world famous sourwood tree comes into bloom. How many of you have ever eaten sourwood honey? It will make you slap your mama, and probably their mama too. Sourwood honey is considered one of the best honeys on the planet. It wins consistently the World Honey Taste Award. You know what another one is that's consistently in the top 2 or 3? Tupelo from the Panhandle. But you better be in the mob if you expect to get the Tupelo. Because those people out there have been putting bees on Tupelo for a long time. They don't like strangers. So you get the next best thing, which is gallberry, which I'm telling you, I'd slap your mama over gallberry. Because gallberry is just a good honey. So my point is, there's some good stuff down here in Florida, but not so much good in north central Florida during summer. So here's an example. This is cotton. If you're lucky, you might get some cotton somewhere, or sourwood, or things like that. But for the most of us, we don't have this advantage in summer or late summer. Now here's some other strategy I want you to think about. I'm going to be done in 10 minutes, Mr. Chesney, right on time. Never early, never late, always on time. That's my motto. My military motto, or one of them, I'm not sure. Late summer, think about this. There's multiple strategies. What if during spring, your goal was simply to produce and sell honey? And you say to yourself, man, I just rode off of producing and selling bees. Think about this. Your colonies are coming out the nectar flow as strong as ever. You've got all summer to continue to grow them, and you can actually use summer to split and create a second income for yourself. You had a spring of honey production, and you're going to have a summer of producing and selling bees. Let me tell you, if you've ever tried to buy a queen honeybee in spring, you have a hard time. When you try to buy a queen honeybee in late summer, they're queens galore. So late summer is a great time to split colonies because queens are available. Typically are cheaper. So a lot of commercial beekeepers do their honey thing in spring and then split, either for themselves for next spring or to carry over winter to sell. I mean, think about all the strategies. If you split in late summer, you can just carry those splits through winter, and then you don't have to split your honey production colonies in spring. You can spend all spring getting them ready for honey. You see how the different strategies come into play here? So in late summer, it might be a good time to split. Here's an example of colonies, little nuke colonies that are being split into. You can see frames from one colony. They're probably back here working, creating all these splits. Once they're done, 150, 150, 150, 150, 150, 750, thank you. Right? Now, that's late summer, summer, disease and pest control, disease and pest control, disease and pest control, fall, disease and pest control, and food. Now they're thinking about going into winter. They've got to have resources, and they've got to have low pest problems. This is where it comes to bite you in the rear end. August, September, I know that it's not fall in August, but September, October, by November, you want your bees healthy and full of honey so that they can cruise through winter just fine. And that preparation must occur from midsummer through fall. So in fall, you're like me, you're praying for things like Brazilian pepper, which is not up here, or Spanish needle, which is up here, or goldenrod, which is up here. The cursed thing about goldenrod is those bloody love bugs come out when goldenrod's in bloom, and love bugs cover goldenrod, and when love bugs are on a flower, bees won't go to it. So love bugs take away 2 honey crops from me. Everybody has privet in their yard. Down here it's called waxleaf ligustrum. That's Japanese privet, and there's also a Chinese privet. Those are great honey plants, but they bloom in the spring flush of love bugs, and love bugs like white, and they cover all the privet, and bees won't go to it. Biology, guys, you've got to know what's going on. But regardless, Spanish needle and some goldenrod really help us out down here. So going into winter, there's no such thing technically here in Florida, but let's pretend for a second that it's winter in December. Going into December, you need to be walking up to the back of that colony, putting your hand in that bottom notch, and trying to curl it with one hand and just about giving yourself a hernia. That's what you want at that time of year. You want them to be strong, heavy, and disease-free going into winter. Does that make sense? So that's essentially what this says. You're not going to be in winter climates down here. You don't have to worry about that so much. But you've got to make sure they've got lots of food and plenty of it. I know I've said the same thing twice, but that's important. High hoist, in other words, lifting the back. I like to tell people to kind of do that every 3 to 4 weeks. If it's light, you're going to have to throw in some remedial food. There's an age-old debate about queen excluders. A lot of people like to say, well, Jamie, what do you do? And what I do is just an opinion. My management style is just an opinion. I happen to use excluders. I would never tell you to use them. But if you use them, you need to take them off in November. They need to be off by Thanksgiving. I will tell you why. I used to read this in the books and never believe it was true until it happened to me here about 2 years ago. In winter, bees follow the food sources up in their colonies. So they eat what's down here and move up, eat what's there, 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 move up. At the end of winter in north central Florida, your clusters are up in the supers. If you have a queen excluder on, your cluster's up in the super, but your queen's dead in the bottom box. So take off those excluders and let them have free reign of the whole box. And when late February rolls around, put the excluders back on, if you use excluders. Make sense? Winter, you don't have to worry about rampant colonies in southern states. The good news about winter is it's a little bit of reprieve from the bees. You can buy the new books, you can repaint the colonies, you can get all that equipment ready for those 52 colonies you're going to have next year. You can get your honey extractor clean, you can build a honey house. I highly recommend one, they're quite nice. You can buy your flatbed truck, you can get your forklift greased, you can make sure you've got enough hive tools and that you've done all the things. Incidentally, most of the state and national beekeeper meetings are in winter because that's the low maintenance time of year. And you can get ready for next season. I want to tell you about a couple things coming up. This winter, you're very fortunate. The Florida State Beekeepers Association meetings in Jacksonville, that's close to you, that's in November. That happens every year. Not always in Jacksonville, it rotates around the state. But even maybe better than that, if it's possible, the American Beekeeping Federation, the national club that's the biggest club in the country, is having their national meeting in January. It does every year in Jacksonville. So in November and in January, you've got the state beekeepers meeting and the country's beekeeper meeting in your backyard. There will be scientists galore, beekeepers galore, bee vendors galore, bee stuff, bee queens, be everything in Jacksonville in November at the state level and then in January at the national level, and there could be 1,000 or 2,000 people at the national meeting. And let's face it, this is the first time in a while it's been held in the South, and we all know people want to get out of the North in the winter. So they're probably going to come to Jacksonville this winter and put on one heck of a show. I've got 3 minutes, so I just want to tell you, if you do everything I told you this morning, you'll be okay. Did you get it all written down? It's a joke. Beekeeping is a lot of trial and error. The beauty is don't get frustrated. People will go get 3 boxes, 2 of them will die, you think you can't do this. Listen, you only need 1 colony to survive. You can split, you keep going, man. I lost colonies before I figured out how to do things. I was alone in Warrenton, Georgia, trying to figure out how to keep bees. It is rewarding when you start getting the pattern down and you start synchronizing with the bees, amazing things start happening. Honey, pollination, more colonies. You learn about bees. Your garden gets pollinated. Amazing things happen. Don't get discouraged. The bees are cheap. If you own the boxes, you have them. So if you lose colonies, just get more bees next year. Big whoopee. Don't give up. Don't give up until you've tried it for 10 years. If you do it for 10 years and can't do it, then you have my permission to stop. All right. I don't know, it's on the next slide, it's probably references. I don't want to end on references. What I want to tell you, this is important. Literally in the next minute, when I put my microphone down in Mr. Chappie's hands, this was my last obligation until I moved to Germany for 6 months. So the way sabbaticals work is the professors are pretty much a black hole. We're hard to get a hold of during the sabbaticals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my lab's website because I don't have memorized all of my team members. If you go to my lab's website, you can go to my team members and find their email addresses and ask them questions. I'm going to give you 2 things. I'm going to give you my email address. My email address is already set back on automatic replies. And in the automatic replies, it gives you the 2 people you need to contact if you have this type of question or this type of question. If you're just patient and wait until March 8th, I'll be responsive again. So my lab's web address is www.ufhoneybee, all one word, www.ufhoneybee.com. www.ufhoneybee.com. For those of you who are techno-savvy, and I strongly encourage you to give this a chance, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with @UFHoneybeeLab. @UFHoneybeeLab. It doesn't matter if you're on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you get this feed. What I tell the people who work for me to take pictures every day of what they do and post it. Essentially, you can live in my lab all year long by being on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. You get our updates, you see our people in the field, you hear our data and results firsthand. We just started doing that and things are cranking up. @UFHoneybeeLab. Or you can do it the lazy man's way, and since I can't remember how to give you the email addresses of those 2 individuals, I can give you mine. You can go home and email me, and instantly you're going to get an auto reply that says, I'm out of the country for 6 months, email these 2 people. And my email address is J for Jamie, D for Douglas, Ellis, E-L-L-I-S, J-D Ellis, E-L-L-I-S, JD Ellis at UFL, sorry, I had to remember, I was about to give you my Instagram name, JD Ellis at UFL.edu. JD Ellis at UFL.edu. Email me now, you'll get the auto reply that tells you who you need to contact. Thank you for putting up with me for 3 hours. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your Honeybee Wednesday. Incidentally, I'm going to stay here for lunch, but I'm going to disappear for about 5 minutes while I disconnect and turn off everything that's been happening here. All right? I wish you happy beekeeping. Let me know how my team and I can help.
Thanks, Jamie. So I'm gonna draw for a few door prizes first. So everybody get your tickets out. We're really excited.
Okay. All right.
648670. Right there? Okay, you can get your prize out there. Stick around though, because we still have announcements. 648695. 695. Okay. 648699. 699. There's a lot more tickets in here than there are people in the room. 648495. okay. I'll get one more. 648504. 504.
That's pretty off. One more.
Was that 648700. All right, so those are our door prize winners. We're going to give you a few minutes to go get something to eat, get a drink, relax a little bit, and then we will resume right outside the front doors for the bee-beard on the mayor and myself. So be excited, I know I am. Thank you.